my name's Kelsang Rabten. I got ordained when I was 21 in '94, and since then I've taught in a number of centres, and I have some spiritual responsibility for Australia and New Zealand and a few other places. The teacher at the centre where I got involved was a very sincere practitioner, and he made it very clear how crucial it was in terms of his own spiritual life. And so I practiced then. I'd actually had some sense of the prejudice towards Shugden Buddhists before that, because the town where I was teaching had another centre, and her Lama was telling the teacher of that centre lots of very negative, superstitious things about Shugden Buddhists and the effects of the practice. And she would try to interfere with our centre's activities. She would try to, when I was teaching there, she would approach the students and tell them horrible things about Shugden and so forth. And then, I guess when the ban was formalized in January '96, then some of the students from the centre where I was involved in Canterbury were in Dharamsala and heard some of those teachings, and then they were phoning back saying, "Oh, you have to stop." The Dalai Lama said you have to stop, and so forth. And so that was there was immediately a certain amount of tension within that little small community. I've had access to the various archives of how things developed. But then a lot of the Tibetan monks in India were contacting England, asking us to get involved, saying that they didn't have any freedom to do so and it was too dangerous for them. And so then we organised a protest outside the Tibet office in London, or Tibet House, and I went there and was involved in that. And then, the demonstrations continued '97, '98, and I was involved because to me it was very clear from the beginning. This is an outrageous restriction of people's religious freedom. You can't ban a practice. You can't pass a law saying that you're not allowed to practice this faith. And also, obviously, I'd studied Buddhism academically before getting involved sincerely as a practitioner. So I studied at university, and I knew the importance of tradition, and I looked at the history within the Tibetan exiles of Trijang Rinpoche and so forth, and saw how important he was, and the importance of practicing within a lineage. And I could see that was being threatened, even though he'd been such a central figure for particularly, obviously, the Gelugpas. To have his teachings and his practices so disrespected was outrageous. And so I was very happy to be involved and to try my best to support the Tibetan Shugden practitioners, but also I'd had my own experiences of discrimination as well, even in the West. Just for example, the prejudice of people trying to interfere with me hosting my classes. People were phoning we were hired venues from various different organizations like the Quaker meeting houses and so forth, and people from other Buddhist traditions would phone them up saying these people are bad, they're evil and so forth, trying to create some disharmony and some problems there. I mean, luckily the people from those places knew us really well and they knew it was completely untrue, but if that hadn't been the case, then that would have caused many problems. I remember one occasion when I was at it was for the freshers, for the new students. I ran a group at the university, and one student who'd been in India and had heard these things about Dorje Shugden came back, and we had a little shrine with images, and he saw the Dorje Shugden one and he tried to smash it. And that was just some Western kid he'd just been to India for a holiday, and enough negativity had been put into him that when he came back he did something really outrageous, and so lots of things like that. He was saying things like he'd been in India and they told him that this was some evil spirit that would cause great harm to people, and that if you do practice it, you should only ever practice it very privately. And he was thinking that I was being putting it very open and I think in his mind contaminating, and so it was like we've seen that, lately we've seen a number of the Tibetan officials sort of describe Shugden Buddhists and the Shugden practice as if it's a disease. It's really horrible language they're using. And even back then that was that got into his mind. I mean, there's this very strange situation where people seem to have an incredible blind faith in the Dalai Lama. So many people will just lose their powers of reason, and people who would normally be quite sort of discerning and check and be logical, suddenly they just glaze over, and if he says it, then it must be true, and it's very, very strange. I mean, luckily, for example, with the kid that tried to smash the image, then I think he was a bit shocked by his own behavior, because it's so outrageous. And I got to talk to him, and we spent the afternoon together, because I was like, look, you can't do that. Like, what are you thinking? And then he explained what had happened. I said, well, at least listen to the other side. And we spent the afternoon talking. And in the end, he was very apologetic, and he said, I'm really sorry. I don't know what happened. But it was like some really potent negativity had been put in him. And I think around the Dalai Lama, there's this sort of aura that you just have to believe. You just have to believe, which is very contrary to Buddhism. Like Buddha said, check. Don't just believe because people call me Buddha. Check. And strangely, when it comes to the Dalai Lama, people just lose that, and they would just blindly follow, even though if they were to look a little bit from the outside back at what they're doing, they think this is horrible. I'm being discriminatory, Within the International Shugden Community, then I've been a spokesperson, so I try to get my message across in different ways to the media, in different forums. Like I was invited to a panel discussion at SOAS, one of the universities in London, and basically what we're trying to do, first and foremost, is get the information out to people. What we're hoping, obviously, is to have a direct dialogue with the Dalai Lama, because we feel that this is a situation that is actually very easy to resolve. Given all of his public statements about the importance of dialogue, the importance of compromise, the importance of compassion, then there should be a very, very strong basis for solving this problem. Like, it should not be difficult to get him to accept our points. We have those 4 points, asking him to put in writing and to distribute throughout the Tibetan exile communities that he doesn't want any discrimination. Like some people say, like, this isn't his fault, but actually all of the discrimination stems from his speeches, and he's never made a speech to say that he doesn't want it. So we want him to start making speeches saying, I don't want discrimination. Like, he can keep his views of the protector, whatever he wants. That's his freedom, and obviously he can give teachings according to his own moral conscience. That's his responsibility. But at least in terms of the way people are treated, he needs to be saying, I do not want discrimination, I don't support discrimination. Please tell all the Tibetan people to stop the discrimination. So he should be doing that. So we're hoping through, obviously through protests, we want to put some pressure on him to make him engage with us. Like, because he hasn't given us the opportunity for dialogue, then we have no choice but to put our message on the streets. We don't really want to be doing all of these things. It's very time consuming, it's very expensive, and it's, we have better things to be doing. Like, we would much rather be focused on our own spiritual practice and getting on with what is our main life, But this is a very important issue, and it's affected millions of people, and going forward it could be hugely damaging. Like, if the Dalai Lama were to succeed in wiping out this precious tradition, that would be a disaster for the world. And so we're trying to put some pressure on him so that he will enter into dialogue, and then actually it shouldn't be hard to solve this.
False Dalai Lama, stop lying. False Dalai Lama, stop lying.
On many, many occasions we've written to him, like finally, and I know some people find it a little bit too much, but finally we've on occasion taken to trying to engage with him directly during his public speaking events. So we tried to communicate. So I've directly asked him, during a question and answer, they said, is there anyone from the audience has a question? And I've stood up and said, will you enter into dialogue with us? We want to solve this problem. And I've offered him a platform. No, obviously I'm not expecting it to happen at that moment, of course, but at least I'm directly speaking to him just to make sure that he is hearing the message. Because sometimes when there's someone with that much power, they have a huge entourage, huge surrounding, and it's difficult to know for sure that your message is getting to them, even if we've written many letters. So at least in that situation, I've spoken to him directly, and I've said, please, will you enter into dialogue? We want to solve this problem. But unfortunately, he was just quite dismissive, and he didn't enter into or even say, okay, look, obviously not here, but let's organize something. He won't enter into dialogue, and that's quite shocking, given his other public statements about the importance of dialogue. We are a Dorje Shugden practicing tradition, and Dorje Shugden practitioners in Tibet, in the exile community, they're our spiritual brothers and sisters, they're our spiritual cousins, and we feel their pain, and also we've seen how it's affected us as well as a tradition. So many of us choose to volunteer to be involved in organizations like the International Shugden Community, and for me, like, it was just very straightforward. Like, I see this issue very clearly. People are being harmed. There are horrible discrimination. Like, obviously people will have seen like the Al Jazeera documentaries, things like that, the Swiss documentaries, where you see signs in shops saying if you practice Shugden you're not allowed in. You know, these are horrible things. One of the reasons I've got so involved is I know if we don't stand up for these Shugden Buddhists, no one else is going to. You know, there are many different issues in the world and people choose their different issues, but no one is standing up for the people who are experiencing this persecution. And so if I don't do it, if people like me who have the freedom to do it don't do it, then no one will do it. Going back to that point about amnesty, Amnesty didn't dismiss it as a non-human rights issue. They wrote a very carefully worded statement saying it doesn't fall within our remit of grave violations of human rights such as torture. They were very specifically not saying that it wasn't a human rights issue. They're just saying it's not within their mandate. I believe, my understanding is that privately they made some fairly strong statements to the Tibetan government in exile. And I know a number of other human rights organizations have done that. The issue is, of course, one thing, unfortunately, is that many people are very compromised in that people have their own material interests, their own political interests, and for the time being associated with the Dalai Lama is very favorable for them. Like a lot of politicians, if they get to be stood next to him, it makes them look good. It makes them look like they're doing something positive. And so a lot of people realize there's an easy way to sort of legitimacy and credibility in terms of like positive seeming messages, and so they're taking advantage of that. They're using him, from that point of view, and he's very happy for that because that also gives him a platform to say his message about the politics of Tibet and so forth. And so there's quite a strong vested interest in him maintaining his position, and obviously over the years he's developed a lot of friends and relationships in politics, in the media. Some of that just very genuinely through people believing what he claims to be doing, and some of that is a little bit more sinister. Like obviously we're very aware that he was funded by the CIA, and that they of course they infiltrate the media and so forth to make sure the messages that come out are aligned with their interests. So there's a number of different forces, and obviously just human nature. We want there to be a magical person who's wholly good. Like people really cling to that. That's one of the things that we notice when we're campaigning is some people get extremely angry that we're questioning him. Even though under any normal circumstance you think, well, everyone in a position of authority should be questioned. You should check whether what they're saying and what they're doing is aligned. And yet some people get very angry that we're even questioning. And I think that shows a very strong attachment. They're clinging to a notion they really want some sort of almost like Santa Claus figure. So we've got we've got political vested interests, we've got the sort of secret behind the scenes stuff, we've got people's attachment to some sort of pure, perfect image. There's a lot of things that are protecting him. But also a lot of that can change. When it does become clear more widely what he's done, and the discrimination, the segregation, it was described as apartheid that he's instigated with his own community. As that comes out, a lot of people will drop him because, that's a abhorrent behavior to be associated with. The Dalai Lama is very much the root of this. Like if it hadn't been for his speeches, none of this would have happened. If he said tomorrow, actually, I don't want any discrimination, please reverse all these policies, the next day they would be reversed. Like although he's nominally not in charge, although he's retired from that sense, he is still the power. He's the Tibetans will, within that Tibetan parliament and so forth, they will not go against his wishes. So what's happening is because they believe it's his wishes. So it would be wonderful if this was not what he wanted, and if he would just say so, then it would stop. They will definitely follow what he says. So the reason we're directing at him is because he's the one with the power to end it. He started it, he can end it, and it's all about him. Many of the people in the Tibetan, in the Central Tibetan Administration, many people running the Tibet houses, privately, a number of them have said, like, we don't support this, we don't agree with it, we wish we weren't doing this, it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable. And in general, like, the Tibetan people are not naturally racist or aggressive or prejudiced in these kind of ways. If it wasn't for the Dalai Lama's speech making them feel that this is appropriate or right, they would never be doing this. So basically we hold him responsible, and he's the one that created it, he's the one that can solve it. Within the Tibetan community there's huge social pressure, and anyone being seen or being labeled is in any way against the Dalai Lama would experience huge problems. Like quite possibly violence and many other negative things. And so I think for a long time they were afraid. There were very few that were brave enough to stand up and say. And over time with the demonstrations, we've given an enormous amount of strength and confidence, and they've seen that the Dalai Lama can't succeed. I think at the beginning they were afraid that they were just going to get wiped out, and if they stood up they would just be wiped out first of all. And over the years with our protests, we've given the strength for them to realize he can't win this, and so people have the confidence to come out. And another thing, obviously at the beginning there was this huge shock amongst the Tibetans, and they couldn't really believe that this was happening, and they felt surely this is a misunderstanding, and if we're just a little bit quiet and we just talk reasonably, then this will all change. So for a long time I think there were a bit, different groups, like some groups were begging us to protest, and some were saying, hold back, maybe we can solve it, maybe if we're just a bit quiet and we talk. But then obviously over the years they've realized all those efforts they made at dialogue were just discarded, and the options were just stop and we will accept you, don't stop and we'll throw you out. And so finally, they didn't expect that it was going to get worse and worse and worse. When you got to 2008 and there was the oath campaign saying no spiritual or material relations, that's like a complete segregation, that's like apartheid in their community, and they realized at that point they have no choice. Like, it's either be eliminated from their society or stand up for themselves. So more and more are coming out. Another thing as well was travel papers. Like the demonstrations have predominantly happened in the West. Like the very first ones were in India, and that was exclusively Tibetans and mostly Tibetan monks. But most of the demonstrations that I've been involved in were in the West. And for those demonstrations, you need travel papers to get there. And for a long time, the Tibetans were struggling to get travel papers. Now more and more are becoming naturalized citizens of Western countries, and that gives them the freedom to protest as well. Some of those first protests, basically, we're all Westerners, except maybe one or two Tibetans. And then we could be easily discredited or disregarded, say, well, look, these are just Westerners, they're saying this, but there's no Tibetans there. Even though the reasons they weren't Tibetans there were because of discrimination, because they were too afraid to be there, or because they weren't allowed to travel, or a whole range of other things. Nonetheless, people would use that argument to discredit our protests. And obviously that gets harder and harder when you have a situation like today where, we've got hundreds of Tibetans here, and they're standing absolutely at the front, and they want to be seen and they want to be heard, and they're making it very clear we completely support this. Also, obviously, we get lots of messages of support from Tibet, from other places, where people are saying, please carry on, your protests give us strength, your protests are helping us. So yeah, I'm like we very much appreciate the Tibetans standing with us. This year has really marked a sea change in the sense that most of for many of the years, even though there had been documentaries documenting a lot of the facts of the persecution and discrimination, still the feedback from the CTA, from the Dalai Lama's people, was this isn't happening. There is no ban, there is no discrimination, this is entirely made up. And obviously, gradually we've been able to get enough evidence into the public forum that they can't do that anymore. They can't pretend that there is no discrimination. So now there's a chink in their armor, and they're saying, okay, there is discrimination, but it's either they're saying it's isolated, or they're saying it's okay because of this and this and this. And for me, that's like the classic sequence of how a politician crumbles. Like a politician's first point is no, it's absolute denial. And then finally when they're caught out, they say, okay, actually, no, that's true, but. So at the moment we're in that's true, but. The next step is that the politician is crumbles, because they've been exposed. And the CTA can't deny what's happening anymore. They just have to try and justify it. And in doing so, they keep making more mistakes. Like publishing the names, faces, photographs, addresses of people who are engaged in peaceful protest, who have no criminal record. It's a clear action of intimidation. It's a clear violation of their basic rights. And anyone who's grown up in a climate of democracy understands immediately when they see a government posting a list like that what a terrible mistake they've made, you know? And then instead of even accepting that and apologizing and taking it down, they go further and say, oh, we had to do that because these people are really violent. It's none of their business. That's a police issue if they're violent. But the fact is, none of these people have convictions for any violent crime. They're completely innocent. No Shugden Buddhist has been convicted ever of a violent crime. So then again, they're lying, lie after lie after lie, and they're just getting tangled up in a web. And eventually it will unravel, and we're getting closer. You can feel that we're getting closer. The biggest challenge, I mean, like for example, like for these demonstrations here in Rome, the Dalai Lama is friends with the mayor. Obviously the mayor has a huge political influence over the police department, and he's given them instructions to try and interfere with us. So initially we couldn't get permits for the demonstrations. They delayed for as long as they could. Eventually they only put us in sites where we're fairly isolated from where the Dalai Lama actually is. Like there's no justification for us being as far away from his venue as it is. And the police privately are saying, actually sorry, this is a political decision. The mayor, we want to limit your embarrassment to the Dalai Lama. So they're trying to hide us. The other day we were out at a press conference and we wanted to make contact with the press as they were leaving the conference. And the moment the press came out, the police surrounded us and kept us away from them until all the press had left. So again, it's a very conscious effort to try and prevent us making contact. The fact is though, luckily, the Italian press have been a little bit wise to that, and they're not going to get deterred from looking for the truth. In fact, they see that and think, hang on, this is really wrong. And so they've been coming over. We've had the main TV station, we've had many different very high level media organizations coming to us because they're interested in the story. So I guess, I don't know if you can call it corruption, but certainly we've had partisan policing, political policing, as opposed to impartial policing. And that's come from the mayor giving them instructions, or that's certainly how it seems and how it's been communicated to us. So those kind of things are obstacles. We've had that before, like we had that in Birmingham, Alabama. Obviously the mayor had invited the Dalai Lama, and there's a lot of prestige involved in showing that you can organize things. And then they cross the line and they make a mistake, which is, it's a morally reprehensible mistake to put politics into people's freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Like we should those rights of us should be guaranteed regardless of whether it's uncomfortable or embarrassing for the local officials. So that we have those kind of issues. I know obviously as well, like to be honest, I've been a little bit disappointed in some of the so-called experts, because a lot of them know what's going on, and for a long time they wouldn't acknowledge it. They would only talk about other things, and I think that was a big mistake. Like some of this wouldn't have happened if people had been more upfront and said and told the Dalai Lama directly, or been very forthcoming in the media when the media contacted them, say bad things are happening. Now partly this situation was allowed to evolve so long because the CTA were getting away with pretending nothing was happening. They would just say nothing was happening. The media would contact various experts, and the experts would say, oh yeah, there's nothing happening. When in fact, I'm sure they must have known. That's their job to know what's going on. They're supposedly experts in those fields. And I think that was a great shame, So we had that, but that's changing as well. Like I think a lot of those academics are being more, like whether they agree with the protests or they agree with the way we're dealing with things. Obviously people are going to have criticisms of us, but they're now saying yes, there is a problem. Yes, it does need to be investigated. Yes, the handling of this situation has been wrong. They're coming a little bit more honest, is what I would say. So there's that, and obviously the media had previously been very close to the Dalai Lama. He has a very skillful PR, very way of gathering people in, keeping people friendly to him. And again, I think that's shifting. People, especially like in the West, we're wanting to check a little bit more what people are actually doing. And I think all of the obstacles that we've had, which were huge obstacles for a long time, are changing. We're gradually breaking through. I have to hope that within the Dalai Lama there is still some faith in his teachers, Trijang Rinpoche, going back to Babonka Rinpoche, some love for the people who are the students of those teachers that he must have deeply respected at one time. And I hope, given that he travels the whole world talking about the importance of human rights and religious freedom, I would hope that at some point someone is able to communicate to him in such a way that he realizes that this has been a terrible mistake. Regardless of his views of the protector, that doesn't justify discrimination and segregation. Of course, he has a spiritual responsibility to teach what he believes. That's his freedom, that's his right, that's his duty. But what it's turned into is a horrible discrimination against people who are completely innocent and don't deserve to be treated in the way they have. And I hope at some point he sees it. I hope some of the videos we make, they have testimonies of people describing the suffering they've been through, how families have been divided, how people have been ruined financially, how people have been refused medical treatment and so forth. I would hope that when that information is presented to him, he has some kind of awakening. He thinks, this is horrible. This is not what I wanted. And then he just says very openly, very publicly, I don't want this, please stop this. I don't know that, because obviously there have been a number of journalists that have said, look, I've seen the calls for violence in the newspaper, like showing him a newspaper which has an advert saying we must attack these people. And he says, oh, it's just rumors. So, and I've presented to him in one of those question and answer sessions, I said, about the discrimination. So I say that because I hope that that's true. I hope that that's true, because the alternative is, very disturbing. If he knows all about all the suffering that's been happening in his name, and he really doesn't care, that's a real tragedy for the world. As the International Shugden Community, although we're being very strong, and although we're very critical of his deeds and so forth, we would be happy for him to stay in his position. We don't want to remove him. We have nothing against him personally. And so if he just says, I don't want this, if he fulfills those four things, puts in writing, sends it to the Tibetan exile community, I don't want discrimination, please let's reunite the monasteries, let's end that schism, let's stop any discrimination and so forth. If he does that, then we were completely happy for him to maintain his role, and we were not going to cause any more problems for him. Our main point is we're against the discrimination, we're against the suffering that's been imposed on Shugden Buddhists. We're against the prejudice, obviously, that we also experience as Westerners, and the difficulties that have been created for us for no good reason. Obviously, from a spiritual point of view, we completely disagree with his opinion. Like his opinion is outrageous and unbased, and the evidence, or so-called evidence that he presents, is easy to dismiss because they're falsified quotations or misinterpreted quotations. Mostly, it's his dream signs, things that we feel have no validity whatsoever. And in the context of an open spiritual debate, if people want to debate that issue, we have absolutely no doubt that we will win, because there is no validity to the arguments he's presenting. And in any case, the bottom line for any Buddhist in terms of choosing a view is which view is more beneficial. And obviously regarding some entity as an enlightened being that empowers us to have compassion and wisdom is more beneficial than regarding an entity as a dark spirit that causes suffering. So on every level we will win. From a spiritual point of view, there's no doubt about that. But this isn't, we're not being allowed a level playing field of a spiritual debate. That hasn't ever happened. And he's used his political power to enforce his religious view. So yeah, if the discrimination ends, then yeah, he will keep probably teaching what he's teaching, and that's his choice, that's his freedom. And we will teach what we teach. People will make their own minds up, and someone who follows reason and logic will support our view. I guess from one point of view, like every Dorje Shugden practitioner, I would think, even if they disagree to some extent with our strategies, they will appreciate our effort and our dedication over all these years. Like the various people that have been involved and have given their time, their money, their energy to trying to make a difference here. And I think that in itself is a unifying force, And I think gradually the various different divergent opinions are unifying, because the people that said, oh, don't worry, if we're just quiet, it'll resolve itself, I think they know that they were mistaken. I think the people that thought, we will be able to talk to. Eventually, we will be able to talk to them. I think they appreciate they were mistaken. You know, we tried dialogue, and there was no dialogue coming from the other side. So I think, in general, a lot of people are clearer that this was necessary. If we hadn't demonstrated, like certainly that was one thing that was very clear at the beginning in those first years. There was the purges happening throughout the exile community in India, and nothing was stopping. It was like a tsunami of prejudice and discrimination. People's homes were getting broken into and their statues destroyed, and horrible, horrible things happening. And if we hadn't demonstrated, then the media wouldn't have gone to India. They wouldn't have shone a spotlight on what was happening, and there would have been nothing to hold it back. So I think in hindsight and over time, people appreciate how important the demonstrations were, and so there's more and more support for that. But also, you know, obviously, there will be many people that perhaps they're more connected or more involved within the CTA and so forth. They've maintained some relationships that perhaps we don't have that access or that opportunity. And so maybe at another point there'll come people who can dialogue on our behalf, or you know, or at least on behalf of Shugden Buddhists. You know, we'll see. I know for a lot of people, they feel perhaps that our protests are provocative, but then I would invite those people to really find out what happened to the Shugden Buddhists, try to understand what they've been through, particularly obviously the Tibetans, particularly in the exile communities in India. Find out what happened, and they'll realize that what we're doing here is very peaceful. You know, we're loud, we're colorful, we're very direct in our statements, but we're not aggressive, we're not angry, we're making very important points. And I think actually it's an incredible testament. You know, for example, for the Tibetans who are here, many of whom have been through horrible, horrible things. The fact that they are protesting peacefully in a very disciplined, very good-hearted way, even after everything they've gone through, is a testament to their character and the purity of their practice. You know, I think a normal person, or someone, by normal I mean someone who hasn't trained their mind, would have got very angry and behaved in a very different way to this. So I would invite people, check what's happened and realize what the way people have responded is a testament to their good character. DorjeShugden.com invited me to do this interview, and I'm very happy to share some of my experiences and some of my opinions.